So today is the Gandhi Nirvan Din, Martyrs Day. It's 68 years after this event. It's a day when we all remember Gandhiji. We are broadcasting from the Sabarmati Ashram in Ahmedabad, and we have Sunita Narain with us. Uh, Sunita, you mentioned this morning when you were talking about how some of the changes in international thinking, the fact that the most powerful nation in the world, which we all used to think of as a world full of science, today even denies something like climate change. And when you talk about sustainability, ecology, and sort of the choices we have, we seem to be going away from thinking globally to thinking in self-interest. And almost it's being made out that talking self-interest is the best way, that everyone has to think of their own self-interest. And somehow this will solve the problems of the world. Quite a different way of thinking than what Gandhi did and many of the leaders at that time, not only Gandhi thought. And I don't know how you see what is the reason for this change.
In fact, I think you put it very nicely with the, and we were discussing, it's really, I think, a global challenge today. And that's where the relevance of Gandhi in the world comes. Because in some senses, you have the crisis of climate change on the one hand. You have a crisis where very rich countries, very rich people are today asking for even more consumption, even the desire to get richer, to grow more. And yet it's all linked to that very, capitalist model where we have done a model of growth for the world which we thought would make everybody rich. But it's made some rich and a lot of people very poor. I think today's Gandhi becomes so much more relevant in today's world where you're looking at a deeply polarized polity. You're looking at nations where there is no dialogue at all. And you've studied, you've worked, you've been your life, and the one thing I know about you has been your ability to dialogue. And I think that pragmatic dialogue to be able to hold your principles but still be able to talk to another with strength and find a middle way. I think that's really what Gandhi needs, that Gandhiism has to come back to the world. We have to find Gandhi for modern world.
But in so many ways, people see Gandhi as something of the past.
Yeah.
While in fact he is someone who came much before his time in many ways. It is even more needed today. And this whole thing of dialogue, which is different from negotiating and arm twisting.
Exactly.
It's very different ways. And in one case, you sort of appeal to the good part of every human being.
Look at what Gandhi did with the British. He dialogued. At no point did he stop the conversation.
And at no point did he say that you are all bad people.
That you are all bad people. So, with me or against me. That was not his way of negotiating and cajoling people to look for his point of view.
But to show, as Gandhi did, that he could argue from strength, but not necessarily arm twist. And it's not arm twist in a negative way, not through threats, but through self reflection. And I think it's almost a technique which we need.
Yeah.
There are questions now coming in. The first question is, can the ideas of trusteeship be made applicable to the ecology? I suppose with climate change, we probably have no alternative but to say that the planet as a whole and all the nations in it are there together. But that voice post Paris seems to be weakening.
Absolutely. In fact, I think the question is an excellent question, but The problem we really have in the world today is that we are going backwards. That the world talked about a trusteeship, whether it came to the oceans, whether it came to Antarctica, whether it came to the global climate and the global atmospheric space. And you said that we need to work together as nations for the larger good, not only of our generation, but of many generations to come. And that we were holding this in trust. And today, as you know, very correctly said right at the beginning, that what seems to be happening in the world is that we are actually breaking this down and saying self-interest is what will prevail. And when you have self-interest, you can't have trusteeship. They're completely opposite.
Opposite. But it's interesting that we say it's opposite.
Huh.
But if you take even the humankind's longer term self-interest, then an environment point of view and self-interest is actually not different. The problem is that you take a short view of self-interest, because the long-term short interest of a climate change, even to a country like America or Japan or anything else, the devastating effect it will have on those countries is enormous. But I think so to some extent, even understanding self-interest in a longer time span, how do you get people to do that?
Yeah. No, I think it's very difficult. I think that's the crux of the problem in today's world, where we keep saying this to politicians that they can't see beyond 5 years. And you're asking humankind to see for another 50 years or at least, but now I believe when you're looking at climate change, it's not even 50 years. You're actually asking people in a very short time horizon to be able to see the writing on the wall. And the writing on the wall is very clearly the world is moving towards a precipice which we will never be able to pull ourselves out of. But yet you have the growth of climate denial happening in today's world. And I see that happening only because science has been so weakened, the institutions of credibility have been so weakened.
I don't know whether I would say science is weakened or the fact that today you have the internet age and you put something on that. You were used to earlier thinking that the printed word was somehow true because printing went through a process. There was someone who had to write it, someone had to process. I mean, it was not easy for anyone to write. Some credibility, even though it was not great.
Yeah.
There was an editor in a magazine, there was a printed word, it had an author.
Yeah.
Today, what is happening is that anyone virtually can write something and tweet it or send it out, and then it gets tweeted and retweeted. Nobody remembers who said it. So there's nobody responsible for an irresponsible statement. And also, I mean, words like alternate facts or alternate truth. Now, it's. I mean, we were watching television, and they said the reporter, this person says alternate truth, and he says, "You mean lies?" Because there was a word for it, which was lies. And today, with the type of climate discussion, so one is of course the science and IPCC and other things. There are groups which talk about it, but how does the consumer, the person who gets some fact, how do they know whether the fact is correct?
No, you're absolutely right. I think it's a real crisis of credibility. But let me ask people who are listening to us, please send us your questions. It's hashtag Sabarmati Dialogue. So let me spell it out. Hashtag Sabarmati, Sabarmati DIALOGUE.
And does the D have to be capital? Yes, so S and D being capital, hashtag Sabarmati Dialogue on your Facebook page or YouTube, and we will get the question here. Another question which is already there is that it's also to do with trusteeship. That if you were to act as trustees, how do you place that idea before the world? I would think that the dialogues when we had the SDGs in 2015 in September, and then November when we had the whole discussion in Paris, I would think that December 2015, I would have said that we should have a
I mean, you had Brexit, you had the elections in the United States, you had, the breakdown of any global order that would argue that climate change is urgent, we need to work together to do something. But I keep saying this, that, in my view, we should not be, everything should make us very pessimistic, but we should not be that, you will agree with me, I know on this. The fact is, the reality that we are talking about is going to happen. And human beings are wise enough to get their act together and to do something about it. And the only way we can actually combat climate change is if we come together. So coming together, dialogue, the ability to be able to listen to each other and not have a conversation of the deaf is going to be so important. And that's where I really go back to your internet issue, because I think in a world where we have so much information, it's ironic how we are struggling to find the truth. And there can only be one truth on this.
Yes, and I think what's happened also is that people have formed their own groups where they read the same thing, they get reinforced with even the wrong information. So if you go to see which newspapers people read, there seem to be newspapers and channels which support what they want, because they're sort of reinforcing.
It's like a bubble wrap.
Bubble.
So just think about it. You bubble wrap yourself and you only listen. I know I like Kartikeya's view, so I will follow him.
Yes.
I will read him.
Yes.
But I don't like somebody else's view, so I will not read them. Or if I read them, I'm going to make sure I harass them so much that they stop engaging. So that's also what's happening, is that you're getting this anger on social media.
No, so it's something where you are sort of, in one way, you're connecting.
Yeah.
And the other hand, you are sort of isolating yourself through forming groups which don't cross into other points of view. And you deny other points of view because you have your own ability to.
But again, Kartikeya, this is where Gandhian thought. I mean, today in the morning I said Trumpvad versus Gandhivad. And I think that's where the opportunity also lies, because, I mean, the principles of conversation, the principles of negotiations on the basis of strength, the principles of localization. I mean, you started talking about that. If Trump is there, he's definitely there's going to be a move against deglobalization. Okay? Maybe that's good, because it gives us an opportunity to do what we should have done for so many years, which is to make sure that you fix development at the grassroots. You fix development for people so that they grow richer rather than the top grows richer. So can we actually get imaginative with localization in today's world?
Localization is perhaps the correct way of describing this, but I don't think that's exactly Mr. Trump's mind when he says America first, because what he's talking about is really self-interest as a philosophy.
But here I'm saying community interest. I'm differing.
No, so you are differing.
I am differing. I'm not, I mean, I agree with you. It's a very fine edge. I agree. It's not, but I am differing, because I'm saying I'm not talking about self-interest. I'm talking about people's interest. I'm talking about community interest. And I'm saying, deglobalization, or what Trump is going to do with protectionism, is going to grow. That call is growing. Trump is already in power. He has 5 years to go, and he is definitely going to build some walls to make sure his country gets richer and blows up further holes in the climate. But the opportunity for us, rather than fighting that, is to say, okay, I'm going to get my own development right. I'm going to make sure that I do development without first destroying the ecology, and also making sure that I make the poor poorer. Can I fix things here?
But if you take America, whole concept of a sanctuary city, a city becoming a city state almost, having to say that we do not agree with the mainstream American point of view, that we will have a different concept of diversity in our state. And New York has said that. In Paris, for instance, they're talking about, the mayor is talking about making Paris environmentally, ecologically more sustainable. You have the London mayor who's talking about something else. So you suddenly are finding local communities, but very strong ones, because these cities are no longer weak. So just like you have a nation states which argue with each other, you now have a city network, and after all, with over 50%.
But that's again the idea of the community.
But this is what I'm saying, the idea of the community in the modern sense is probably happening in the city.
Absolutely, but I think that's where we have to take Gandhi and we have to drag Gandhians to it. If I can be a little sort of controversial about it. Gandhi lived when India was a rural country only. And everything he wrote and he believed in was the way we visualized growth in rural India. And I think he put very important principles there of the village republic, or principles of local production, of all those issues. But Gandhi wasn't alive when we've seen the pollution of Delhi, when we've seen the complete mess that we have in our cities where the sign of civilization is plastic. And I think what we need now is to reinvent Gandhi for the modern Indian, for the urban Indian.
The urban Indian. So
and I think he has a huge value, but we are not being able to interpret or reinterpret Gandhi. He's not there. And somehow all of us who are his followers are not able to place the relevance of Gandhi in the mess of urban India. And I think he's more relevant today for urban India than even for rural. They'll fix it there. We can't.
No, for rural India, first of all, he said a lot of things. And people are looking for other alternatives in terms of a smart village, smartness. But in a city, and looking at the fact that India is looking at what new smart cities will be, what does a smart Gandhian city look like? What does a sustainable city look like? And how do you come to that? What would the dialogue of community there?
And it's so interesting you're saying this, Kartikeya, because for so long Gandhians have actually rejected any idea of the city.
Yes.
And therefore there's always been, we know what to do about, we want
village.
Yeah, and the city is kind of, it either doesn't exist, or if it exists, it's not important. And yet I think if you don't fix the city, you're only going to make a further mess in agriculture or rural. So I think it's very right for you. I mean, I like the idea of bringing the modern movements, the community movements which are emerging from the rich cities of the rich world, and seeing their relevance in terms of the modern Gandhian.
So the modern Gandhian community might in fact be found, or is emerging on its own, in terms of cities wanting to be sustainable, and now being powerful enough to be able to say things and withstand that. Maybe that is.
But again, it's the principles, the diversity principle, the tolerance principle, the principle of inclusiveness, the principle of saying.
Let's look at some of the questions we are getting. We are getting a question which says, "You need to speak about dialogue and debate. How can this be an ethical framework for such a dialogue and debate? Is there? What is that ethic?"
That's exactly what Kartikeya and I were discussing. It's such a good question, because really, we're saying that ethical, no dialogue or debate can happen without that ethical framework. I think that's what we first have to define. Gandhiji defined his foundation. He never moved away from certain principles, whether it was principles of inclusiveness, principles of diversity, of tolerance. Those were principles that were sort of part of his DNA. And then the rest, you could dialogue, you could debate, you could find an answer ahead. And I think that's where we are finding in India, and I think globally, we have made principles or ethics or morality a dirty word. We don't even want to go there. So everything becomes more transactional, therefore. And I think that's why this question is important, that we really need to make sure that you get your framework right, and then you start the dialogue.
No, but with India using the word smart cities or resilient cities, all these words which are coming in, can we not bring in the ethics into that discussion in a much more meaningful way, saying that you cannot have a smart city, or you cannot have a good city without those ethical principles. And those ethical principles are to do with rights for children, rights for pedestrians,
making sure everybody has the right to drive, everybody has the right to walk, everybody has the right to bicycle, everybody has a toilet,
no, everybody
has
air you can breathe.
And air you can breathe.
If you can't provide, I mean, the next thing comes first, but you're talking about ODF, we are talking about, but what about air?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, if I can't breathe, then that I would say is the very basis of needs which we have. Please ask questions if you
want. I think there are a lot of questions here. Let's get some other questions, Kartikeya. We've been asked, and I think we should both look at the camera so that we can actually read the questions also and make sure we don't get lost in each other's conversation. So it is said that any idea that seeks to change consumption behavior is doomed to fail. This is the reason for marginalization of Gandhi's economic ideas. Will sustainability also meet the same fate? You know, this is it's a touchy question for me. I don't know how many of you have seen, I don't know if Kartikeya you saw, but the film that that Leonardo DiCaprio had come to India to shoot, and he asked me the same question because we were discussing climate change, and we were discussing the question, and I was basically raising that consumption has to be part of the dialogue on climate change. And Leonardo DiCaprio's response to me was, but that's not possible, because in America, if I discuss consumption, it will basically put off so many people, and it's not going to happen because nobody is prepared to go to the idea of consumption change. They only want to talk about renewable energy. And I believe this is really where the center of the debate is. I mean, Gandhiji was able to make people give up salt. Gandhiji was able to make people do things that we would all find completely impossible to do. And I think he did that because of his my granduncle was somebody who did not eat salt from the day he walked with Gandhiji for the Dandi March. After that, for 40, 50 years, he survived after that. He never ate salt. I think the fact is we don't have leadership in the world like Gandhi, who was able to articulate the most difficult challenges and yet cajole people into believing it had to be done because it had to be done. You need the passion of a leader, you need the commitment of a leader to be able to get societies to do this. I don't believe the Americans are so addicted to their car that if they know that car is responsible for climate change, which is not only going to destroy them, but also destroy large parts of coastal world and large parts of India where farmers are suffering, then they won't be prepared to change. And we are not talking about going back to the forest or living as even the image of Gandhi is, you know. We are talking about having well-being for societies, perhaps not gross wealth. So I think you need to replace this dialogue.
You can't take the need-greed out. And I thought one way in which one can do that is to focus on waste. That is, you can say that please consume what you want, but do not waste. Now, the minute you say don't waste, you cannot consume more than that. You cannot, for instance, eat however big you are. If you decide you don't want to waste, then you can only eat so much. So to decrease consumption, a starting point for that is to say let's do what we like, but do not waste. And that itself decreases. Now, when you talk about waste in a different sense, like wasteful use of vehicles, for instance, something else, you do need to go to shared facilities. And I think one of the things which is emerging today, whether it's a cab taxi service or it's a way in which we share a number of services today, I think are we going to a world where the only way of being able to afford something of a quality is shared use.
You know, Kartikeya, you mentioned something so important, and I think we should discuss that. You know, if you look at Uber, you look at Airbnb today, two big businesses of the world, they are disruptive businesses to the old business, the brick and mortar business. But what have they done? They've actually found a smart way to optimize on the individual asset and say, here are individual assets. You have a room, I can rent it out. You have a car, you can rent it out. I'm basically optimizing on individual assets rather than creating large conglomerates which have lots of wealth under one place. And I, seeing Uber and Ola, one of the things that has really struck me is how smart informal businesses in India are, which also do the same thing. If you look at your rag pickers today in the waste business, they take all your individual waste and they turn it into a resource. They take every bit of plastic and they have an intricate pattern chain in which that plastic is reused. You look at your sewage system and how the septic tank cleaners will take it and clean it. You've got a whole variety of businesses which are disruptive businesses which operate in our world.
They're disruptive only of the old order.
Of the old order.
Yeah.
But I think that's what we need more of, because today employment is going to be a challenge. It's clearly going to be a big issue with artificial intelligence. I mean, I read this fascinating article recently in the New York Times, in fact, saying that Donald Trump didn't need to worry about China. He actually needed to worry about artificial intelligence, because the coming of artificial intelligence is going to do more disruption to the business of employment than even China is. And I think that's what the world is today moving towards, and that's where, in my view, I always find Gandhi so relevant.
But I suppose you would ask whether the robots are made in China or made in America. So, I mean, you want to know the robots should replace you, but then you also want to know where the robots are made.
Yeah.
But coming to that, the whole Gandhi's comment on need and greed, there is a desire, as you say, not to have the image of frugality, which Gandhi often says, but person does suppose wants SUV. And I was talking to a friend in Sweden who said that in our whole society we have one SUV and we all book time. So that only those days when we want to go out with the family on a picnic or something where it's justified, we share. So in many ways, you have a different concept of need and greed, which is time shared now. So you can do certain things.
It's so interesting, because that's like the land share that Vinoba Bhave and others started. So in some senses, the concepts are the same.
Concepts are same, but how you share something so that in the minute you had an older model where you either possessed it or not possessed it, then many things to possess doesn't make sense because it's greed. But if I say I actually only wanted one day a month, then probably it's not greed anymore. So you can redefine these things in today's context. And I think, therefore, Gandhi is something which is an ongoing dialogue rather than some sort of a Bible which you read saying these are the principles. I think the whole idea was the dialogue. And I think one of the questions we are getting is how do you get this dialogue into local governments, municipalities, panchayats? How do you get the dialogues? Because I think the whole concept of sustainability is not a single idea. It has to be worked out in every context. The sustainability of a city like Ahmedabad is different from Pune or different from Srinagar. And I think we need to look at sustainability so that I think redefining democracy to some extent and decision making is also part of this dialogue. And I think many people internationally, again after the wins of Trump and others, are also questioning how democracy acts and what are the powers at different levels. And I think we are in a process of churning here.
No, absolutely. And I think that what Donald Trump's victory does show is that there are a large number of people who believe they're not being heard. I think, to me, that's also the message that comes out, and that comes out very strongly to say they believe they were marginalized. So that he is basically saying, you were not heard and I'm hearing you now. Now, we may disagree with what, and we may disagree with that, whatever, but again, if Mahatma Gandhi was alive today, and if he was to have a conversation with Donald Trump, he would not say, I will not speak to you.
No, but he also, being a good banyan, knew how to dialogue with Donald Trump, I'm sure.
But that's what I'm saying. He would have actually made Donald Trump sit down and say, yes, you have a group of people who are marginalized. I also have a group of people who are marginalized. Now let's try and see whether there are some commonalities between the two groups who are marginalized and see whether we can still find a common future together. And I think that's what Gandhiji did with the British. And I think he would have been brilliant with Donald Trump.
I think so. I think because he understood the language in some ways
of negotiation.
Negotiation as much as he did, but what he brought in was negotiation with ethics, which is one of the questions that he even on a winning streak, he knew when to stop and saying that this is not going ethically, and let me stop having that type of discussion. Another emerging set of comments which are coming through the questions is how does face-to-face and the fact that you have platforms like what we are having right now, how does the fact that you have these opportunities, how does Gandhi's methodology become even more relevant or more doable at a global scale? Because you also have a globalization possibility, this thing, but for the fact that there are different time zones. And once we develop this methodology more, one could have people across the globe participating in a discussion of this nature.
Kartikeya, I think this is really so important because at some level you think about it, when Gandhiji was there, how he made his ideas reach the whole globe without internet. I mean, we just saw a clip of the film Gandhi where Martin Sheen is phoning, and it used to be a teleprompter or a telegram that a journalist sent to tell their story. And today what it takes is for you to take your phone and as the story is developing to actually say and broadcast it across the world. And yet that power is not being used to actually bring together an idea of a whole community, of a village, of a city which is about people and their voices. That power of social media is actually becoming more and more usurped to, as you said earlier, we were discussing, is becoming little circles.
Yeah, but then you also have, coming back to Trump, he managed to use Twitter to reach out to people and say move to the media. Now he understood that media, not necessarily everyone does, but there is a thing. So I think just like any technology, you have opportunities and you have issues. So I think we have to see how to create those platforms. In the ashram itself, as you know, we did the Gandhi Heritage Portal. And again, the whole purpose of the portal is to say that let there be at least some credible sources. So if we hear something, we can go and find it. And I think what needs to emerge on the net also is ways in which you can credibly search. I mean, it's
very important.
It's great to have something like Wikipedia, which is generated through people, but there will also have to be the sources which are expert oriented and where someone can say. And I think so. We are perhaps in this in between age where we are going from this excessive consumption, completely crazy use of fossil fuel and an older city to something which perhaps 10 years down the line, you will look back upon these years as human folly. I don't know whether you see that emerging as people realize it more and more.
I see it emerging only if you have the right drivers and triggers to make that happen. I'm not sure it will happen on its own, because I think there is enough greed in this world and there is enough power in this world where the rich have so much power that they would not change voluntarily. So I think you have to realize that the world is in trouble. I mean, climate change is real. It is urgent. You're beginning to see changes happen in the world in front of us. That today that the poor are affected, but tomorrow the rich will also be affected. And I think it's that deep realization that have to change. You have to do things differently. That I think will bring the changes in society, behavior changes. Just think about it. The only real behavior change that we have seen over this last, I mean, this last decade or so has been smoking. And it's come because, in some senses, people understood the impact on their bodies. And it's a decision that every human being has taken. And the state has helped it by informing us that, yes, that science is correct. They've not kept the ifs and buts and maybes in it. So there's clarity, smoking kills. The size of the lungs on the box tells you it is bad. The science is very clear, and that is made clear to you. And I think that's what we require in climate change, science to be clear that it is happening and that people need to be told that there is no other way other than us doing things differently.
But if you take, I mean, it's a good example, but if you take cigarette smoking, it was in the 60s
Yeah.
that the Surgeon General of America
That's right.
said very clearly, unambiguously, that cigarette smoking was injurious. And just think, we're 50 years from that time, and it took 50 years, almost 40 years, before you could actually have laws, you could have changed things, and where people will say that this is not acceptable. Now, that type of time frame, because you have the same movement that you're seeing in climate change. You've got people denying it. You've got many companies which are connected with tobacco, almost releasing research which are not doubtful, but they are very selective. There's an interesting book which shows that you got 30 papers, all which are correct. One of the papers seemed to suggest that it was not so bad, and you published that, and you suppressed the 29. So it's not that you published the wrong thing, but you selectively published it. There are many analyses of how you could defer the realization of smoking causing cancer for so long. And even now, the tobacco companies can survive because they go to areas where the realization is less. And they go to women, for instance, they go to groups which are different. So you had that. Now, the point is, do we need to go through, in today's age, a 50-year cycle that climate change comes to be known?
But this is what does worry me tremendously, is that I thought we had kind of gone through that cycle. And
for climate
for climate change. And I thought Paris
was that.
And by then you had put all those, at least the basic issue that climate change is real, it is happening, it is urgent, and it is man-made. Just those 4 issues I thought were now resolved.
Yeah.
And then we have many more things to resolve. Now we were to move to saying, okay, so what do we do about it? How do we actually reduce emissions? Can we go between shale and coal and still believe we are reducing emissions? What's the role of renewables? Is it renewables for renewables? Is it renewables for energy access? How do we meet the needs of millions of people who still are not connected to energy and yet save the world from climate change? I thought those were the questions that we would now start discussing. But now with Trump, we're back almost to square one. And knowing American NGOs who were so timid, even when you had progressive governments in place, you can imagine now American media, American NGOs, they're going to go into a shell and say, don't say anything, because now Trump already denies climate change, and now he will make it, if we say anything, there'll be even more denial. You can't fight more denial with denial. You have to fight that denial with a greater sense of this is the truth. Gandhi ji said that very clearly. The truth is the truth is the truth.
But do you think people relaxed when Paris happened? Do you think
no, I don't think people relaxed.
What happened?
I think Paris was a failure in any case. You know that, that's my view. I will not change it. Paris was a failure because the world was trying to stitch together an agreement which was both unambitious and unequitable. But it managed to stitch together an agreement because it was so desperate to do something, anything. Now, I don't believe that's what I am very I believe.
So where the desperation gone? Why today? I mean, one thing which happened was in Europe, which was one of the forces behind it. You had the migration crisis, and it totally overtook.
You also have a crisis in Europe where Germany is going back to coal. Okay?
Germany,
with 40% renewables in its electricity mix, first year German emissions have actually gone up, not down. 40% renewables in your energy mix, and yet your emissions go up because you're moving to coal. You're producing more energy, which is
but that's because
coal-based
they're
for
decreasing the
export.
nuclear very fast.
They're decreasing nuclear very fast, absolutely.
So-
but,
so the-
but that bundle is really dangerous for the world.
Yes.
I mean, it's also about reducing need for energy if you're going to reduce nuclear.
Yeah, but
Not
Germany is
switch.
still seen as one of those models
Oh, it is a
where,
model.
where energy thinking and renewable thinking and there's a sort of long-term thinking. You don't see that in many countries.
I agree.
That,
I agree.
that you have that type of.
No, I agree with you.
Okay, there's a question on the word on non-acquisition, the aparigraha, and is an old idea. It says on the principle of Gandhi that can it be ecologically powerful?
But that is what you were discussing
Yes.
a while ago, Kartikeya, when I thought, the idea that of shared cars,
Yes.
of shared houses, where you're actually saying that I'm not acquiring it, I'm actually sharing it when I need it. And that's becoming a modern concept.
Exactly. So
And it's coming in the richest societies, who basically are saying well-being does not mean the number of cars I have. Well-being means the quality of life I spend with my family. So if I spend 3 hours on the road, I'd rather spend those 3 hours at home, reading, listening to music, doing something I care about. That's well-being. So in some senses, Kartikeya, this is that whole debate that the world has struggled with and doesn't have the courage to bite the bullet, which is how will you redefine the measure of prosperity? If today's measure of prosperity always will remain the GDP as we know it, we will never measure correctly all the values of community, the values of sharing of time, of values of well-being. And I think that's really, in some senses, if you go back, and I'm sure if we put together the principles as redefining wealth for a nation, as well-being for a nation, you would get to exactly where Gandhi wanted you to be. But who's going to do that? There's been commission after commission at the global level. The French government had Amartya Sen and Stiglitz do a massive report on redefining measures of value in wealth.
But there was talking about wealth and economists. We had on Gandhi Jayanti here. We had Sabarmati talk. The whole idea of having a universal income, where someone is, and he actually presented it why Gandhi would have opposed it, because the whole idea was that you on one hand the idea is that you get services for everyone, and people should be able to use it, but getting money for free is an idea which is quite alien.
Completely.
And it's something which bothered me very much.
Today, the rich societies are only talking about it because they don't know what to do with their people.
Exactly.
So you're telling farmers, don't farm. I'll give you money not to farm.
No, money to destroy.
Leave your farm as it is and I'll pay you. I mean, is that your notion of productive income?
Exactly.
Is that your notion of building a society which is able to think? I mean, you're creating a dual society.
So exactly. You're creating a dual society, and your incentive is everything is done on money. In fact, talking about ethics, you're really throwing it.
And can you imagine what that money society would mean in a highly inequitable home society of India, where even if you said there would be money, and even if you were to say, if you were a progressive government and say, I'm going to open the bank account only in the woman's name, which at least would be one step ahead. But it would only lead to that money going spent in every non-essential activity. Yeah. I mean, you cannot talk about a dual society as being a society which is a society which at all cares about its people. Right. So this universal income idea, I don't know whose harebrained idea it is, but I just hope that somebody on top is not buying it.
Yeah, because they argue that even the older people who are not being looked after, now they will keep them at home because each one of them is a the bank account.
But come on,
But that should
Kartikeya.
not be the reason
Yeah.
why you do it. And secondly, they will
No,
never have
I
they will never
understand
have the
about-
way to use it.
No, I understand when you are given cash incentives to women to go to a hospital to deliver children.
So then there is an action.
It's an action, exactly.
It's connected
What
with
I
something.
have found very bizarre is that you have taken that action and you are now universalizing it as an idea to say, I'm going to pay you and it will come into your bank account. I have an Aadhaar number for every one of you. You're in my system. I'm going to transfer the money and then I really don't want you to tell me
Anything.
just anything. Vote for me and that's it. I mean, is this a country?
No, but it's
I
a very,
really-
very dangerous in some ways idea.
I'm hoping
The community
Kartikeya,
gets into
that you and
populist-
I are just discussing
populist
this
culture.
because we have nothing else to talk about.
Because-
Because
no,
like,
because- it's
nobody
not like that.
serious is talking about this.
No, I know, but apparently it's being tried out while you
I
speak
heard.
in certain districts of India.
And
Not
I
only-
don't think it's been tried out in districts. I think it's in the minds of some
No,
people.
there's apparently, I just read yesterday, there's apparently a book on these cases where it's tried out, it's being argued elsewhere in the world.
It's been argued in the
And
rich
I can
society.
understand because if you saw the television coverage after Katrina in America,
Yeah.
and you saw all these people who you have made them invalid almost because you give them money, you basically try to get them out of your
But
your
that's the electorate of Donald Trump today. That's also the people who are saying we are angry. The most bizarre thing that is happening, and I'm going to say this even though we're sitting in Gujarat and it's probably going to be rather controversial, but the fact of the matter is this country is seeing the most strange movement that I have ever heard of, where the most forward castes of the country want to be called backward. The Patels, okay, the Jats, which were promising to start an agitation yesterday, the Marathas, these are all land holding castes, forward castes, people with money. Today they're going onto the street and saying, call me backward. I mean, to me, there's a crisis of saying there's a crisis with the way we managed our land. The fact is that agriculture is today the most broken thing. Aspirations of people have gone beyond agriculture, and today they're saying, I want to be called backward. It's the only way you'll recognize that I exist. Is that a society we're creating? I mean, this is where I find the parallel between Donald Trump and the Patel movement of India very similar. The rich of America who want to be richer, and the rich castes of India who want to be called poorer because they believe they're being marginalized. Both tell you that there is an economic system which is completely not working for its people. If at all, that should tell you, let's start doing things differently.
That's in a sense because you brought everything onto a money equation
Yeah.
and all other values. So the fact that I'm called poor or not poor or backward or not backward doesn't seem to matter. Because otherwise, it would have meant like an honor question. I mean, some 20 years ago, if you said I'll call so and so backward, there would have probably been agitation on that. But you have this strong sense now of people not minding anything, and to some extent, it is mapping everything onto a single dimension. You have the Nariga, for instance, where you refer to a large population of this country as being unskilled.
So that brings us
When
to
they're
a
not-
very important question. I think a question that is meant to provoke both of us, and a good question. So are these fancy ideas? And the person is clearly asking you and me to be serious about this. Are these fancy ideas of trusteeship meant for the poor? The common man is still searching. What about the woman? But the common man is still searching for basic education for his kids and her kids, and basic healthcare, etc. But that's exactly what we are talking about. I think Kartikeya and I are discussing the fact that, the trusteeship is meant for providing for everybody's need, but for nobody's greed. And I think that's really, at the end of the day, most powerful statement of Gandhiji, which has been paraphrased and written and rewritten and reworded, but the most powerful statement ever, which is That is the trusteeship, but that's not what we are doing today. And that's when I look at Donald Trump and I see his appeal to the electorate in the US, which is arguing that I am rich, I am white, I am male, and yet I have not got enough. So that system has not even worked for the rich. How can we expect it to work for the poor? And I think that's really what Kartikeya and I have been discussing. That idea of trusteeship is much bigger than what we have ever practiced or are practicing today.
But the trusteeship idea of the family and the fact that so many parents today see education as a way out of what they missed is quite incredible.
Yeah.
The woman who comes to clean at our place. I was asking her what her son is doing. He's just graduated, and she's not literate, and I was trying to get her to be literate. Her son is now not going for a job, but he's doing something offline through his computer somewhere else.
Yeah.
And another person is saying, I've gone up and they're doing this. And I think the fact that education is something which is a way out.
Oh, it's a game changer.
A game changer. I think that is something which is today recognized.
It's a game
that people are not taking, whether they're
but
remember, and there's a hunger for that.
Yeah, but remember, Kartikeya, this is what makes for an exciting India. That an educated, literate India, where the young will want to see change happen, is going to be a very different India than the India that you and I have lived in, which is an India with vast numbers of illiterate, powerless, disempowered, marginalized people.
Exactly.
And that makes me hungry to be young again. I actually feel like if I could relive, I would love to see this different India, because this India, I promise you, is not going to take the nonsense of what I call Newton's Delhi, Lutyens Delhi, apart the largest gated colony of India, which is surrounded by green, when nobody knows that the mess that operates outside, and they are the ones in charge. They are the ones who are running this country. You will not be able to have this disparity. You will not be able to have a lack of sensibility about meeting the needs of all. And I think that's the interesting part.
Yeah. So that
New India.
This whole new India or the youth, and the fact that you have so many young people who are connected, who know, who lived through this thing, have aspirations which are different, and I think that's exciting, right, for India. I think.
Yeah, no, very exciting. I just want to, we have the last 5 minutes, and I want to close with my most favorite story right now. I'm, I do a lot of work on garbage right now, as you know. I've just done this book, Not in My Backyard, and I got the title of the book, and I see this as the change for the future. That's what excites me. Not in my backyard has been the typical phrase we've all used. Don't build a nuclear plant in my backyard. Build it somewhere else where people poor live. Don't put a garbage dump in my backyard. Put it somewhere else. But now, with changing India, everybody's backyard is somebody's front yard. And as literate, educated India starts rising up and saying, not in my backyard, we will have to reinvent. This is exactly what happened in Kerala. In Kerala, the village where Thiruvananthapuram was taking its waste to, or Alapi was taking its waste to, was outside the city. My own city of Delhi dumps it in Ghazipur or Wazirabad, which is where the poor of Delhi live. But in Kerala, where the city was dumping its waste, the people in the village said, over my dead body, will you take your waste to my village? Because not in my backyard. But that prevailed, and that is forcing Thiruvananthapuram and Alapi to reinvent its waste management system, because now they have to compost, they have to recycle, because there is no place for the waste to go. And I think that notion of a literate, educated India, not in my backyard, forcing more community thinking. Till now, not in my backyard has meant the rich versus the poor. but it's that powerful India that will emerge, which I think will be a change.
But what's that? Another story from Kerala,
Huh.
because we worked very closely with a group which was doing hospital-based management, and that's become a very strong group. It's a non-governmental thing, but run by hospitals and doctors.
Okay.
And they've set up one such facility. They managed to get 27 acres of land, and it collects hospital waste from all over. But he said that he had to make it one of the best gardens, so that waste, the whole concept of waste, was no longer something dirty.
But that's
And the reason he had to do it was because people are saying, no, the north and the south of Kerala are both saying that we will not allow you to put up a facility here. So he is now they're trying to make it nice. And the whole concept of an economy being not linear but circular. And in fact, India's whole historically thinking has always been circular. And then we were almost sort of brainwashed to thinking economy was to do with linearity and growth. And the minute you talk about growth, you have waste and you have something left behind, as opposed to the circular economy. So in many ways, the world is discovering things which India had very much as part of its thinking. And how do we make ourselves
modernize it?
No,
We
so
need to modernize it.
concepts,
We need to make sure that it's relevant to modern India, because it is part. We need to bring the principles back in.
yes, so we had something like OLX coming to us
Yeah.
and saying, aren't we doing a tradition
Yeah.
in a new way? And calculate what we do through give us our.
But if OLX is also promoting more consumerism, I'm not sure it's exactly what is it that we want. So we also need to think about, we need to make sure that we don't, I'm only reacting this way because I get a little worried about this very jingoistic tradition of India where we were the best, we did it all, we can teach the world, and yet we're drowning in our own garbage and sewage today. So I think we need to understand that, yes, we may have had it all. We have some really good ways in which we learn to cope with nature, live with nature, survive with nature. But we need to make sure that we have the humbleness and not the arrogance to know that we will have to do it much better in the coming years.
So discovering ourselves, can very easily in India get into arrogance that we knew it all. But I think just like you said in the beginning, that Gandhi's relevance today has to be rethought of. It's not just picking up Gandhi and said that was it, but we have to understand the essence of it, the DNA of that thinking, rather than the outward form. And the same thing, in a sense, goes, and I suppose that's the sort of tone of this whole thing. And maybe you would like to say a word or two about how we do it. We've talked about Gandhi in urban India as one such idea.
No, I think, Kartikeya, we should continue this conversation and have another conversation on this. But I think the basic idea that both of us are saying very clearly is that Gandhi, today's world, which is so broken, so divided, so polarized, so completely lost because its economic system is both taking the world towards a climate change catastrophe, lost because its economic system is leading to economic divisions and inequality in its own societies. That world is looking for